Hi, everybody. I'm Anne, and this is my daughter, Sigourney.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking today about playing tabletop role-playing games with kids. So by way of a little bit of introduction, I've been playing role-playing games many decades. We won't go into how many. So of course, when my kids started growing up, one of the things I was interested in doing is getting them into RPGs. We were fortunate enough to have in this area some conventions that had a sort of a junior convention, if you will, where kids were invited to come in and play with their peers, play RPGs. And so I used to help with that. My daughter used to help with that. And so we've kind of been doing RPGs in some format or another for a lot of years at this point.
Yep.
So we're going to break this talk up into a few different age groups and categories. We're going to start, actually, I'm going to mention really briefly sort of pre-literate ages and how you can kind of prep your kids toward being interested in RPGs. And then we're going to talk about elementary school kids, junior high kids, and high schools students. So that's going to be how we'll approach this. Please type your questions into the chat window. Desiree will go ahead and forward those on to us, and let's get started. So the very first thing I want to say, though, is my personal approach to role-playing is I have one overarching rule, which is never let a rule or a bad die roll get in the way of a good story. So, and I feel pretty strongly, and you'll see that coming through this whole talk. Role-playing for me isn't about the rules, and it isn't a competitive dynamic between the person who is setting up or GMing for everybody else. It should be a cooperative storytelling experience. And so you should give your players some agency to help drive the story, because trust me, you will get the best stories that way. And the corollary here too is don't focus on the rules. When players want to do something, let them do it. Figure out how to make it happen. So don't limit yourself to just what a rule system says you can do. Find a way to make it happen, because that's where the fun comes in. All right, so pre-literate kids, we'll start there. How do you prep a kid for role-playing, even at a really young age? And the answer is you don't have to. Kids at that age play Let's Pretend. It is natural. They do it on the playground. They'll do it on the playground actually for all the way through elementary school. But Let's Pretend is an integral part of growing up and developing. So encourage it, let them have fun, play Let's Pretend with them. And above all, one of the best things you can do is read to your kids, do fun stories, ask them how a story ought to go. And if you don't have storybooks that lend themselves to that, you can actually go out and get a few things here, like Rory's Story Cubes. These are just really simple dice. They come in all different kinds of themes, and they just have different icons on them. And they're just great for, getting your kid involved in creating the story with you. You can also use games. Once Upon a Story is another game that has cards that just have sort of iconic items from storytelling. An apple, a door, a crown, a prince, a wishing well. You don't even have to know how to read. Everybody understands these particular icons, and you can work with your kid to create stories. So that's about all I'm going to say about that, because it isn't really about doing role-playing games with your kid. It's about encouraging their imagination and interacting with them at that level. Okay, so let's start with the meat of this, elementary school. So if your kid is learning how to read, learning how to count, now they are ripe for getting into role-playing games specifically. Kids this age, what we found is 1 to 2 hours. Kind of depends upon your kid. Don't push it. Don't expect to have a long overarching story necessarily that carries over from week to week. Maybe day to day if you are just playing with your kids, but in your house, and you can do this every day. But single shot storytelling for an hour or two can be a ton of fun. Kids this age like to have a character that is good at something. And one of the things I've found is that kids will have a success in a story doing something, and that's going to become their go-to thing to do. Even if it was a fluke, even if it never ever works again, that's going to become their go-to signature thing that they like to do. And that's cool. Encourage it. Encourage them to build something around it. If it starts to become frustrating, you can also start to steer them away towards other things they might do. Kids this age don't have a lot of life experience, so they're looking for you also to give them hints and suggestions on where they can go with a character. So one of the things that I advocate for really young kids is go ahead and use some tools like GM screens, because a lot of times they're decorated with fun artwork. You can really set the mood for the game, but sometimes too, they'll have pictures that can give kids hints on what they can do in this setting or in this scenario. And also, as an adult GM, you can roll your dice behind the screen and honestly lie. if you have rolled something that is just going to break a kid's heart, lie. This is not about being better than them. This is about making sure they're having fun. Because at this age, if they're having fun, it's going to carry through. And so this is one of the few times that I really advocate, fudge those dice. It's not relevant. You're there to tell a story with your kids and your kids' friends, and just have fun with that. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so one thing that can be really fun to do with your kid is to get like little miniatures. Don't use your big, fancy, super expensive miniatures, because anything you bring to the table with elementary school kids is liable to get broken or dented or scratched or whatever. So that's not saying it will, but you have to keep that in mind when you're bringing these things to the table. Some great alternatives are like uh, bulk plastic miniatures. That you can also get HeroScape miniatures, which are really fun. And then one of my favorite things that I experienced when I was this age was little Lego minis. So if you have these at your disposal, you can give your kids a bucket of parts and have them build their own little character, and that can really breathe some life into how they express their character as they're playing, because they have a little miniature that they made themselves that they really put the idea for this character into, and sometimes that can be a launching off point. Plus, they're really hard to break, and if you just have a whole bunch of random parts, it's okay if you lose a couple of them. But it's also really tactile. It can give some kids something to fidget with, something to move around, and that can be really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm seeing in the chat, Tor is saying they're taking so many notes. We do have some summary slides at the end that kind of highlight some of the key tools and concepts that we're talking about. So don't be afraid to also just listen and ask questions. So tell them a little bit about the one Lego adventure that Abby ran for you when you guys were real little.
Yeah. So when I was in this kind of junior convention program, there was one GM there that was super nice, and she had a whole ton of Legos, and she built sets out of Legos. She had all of the bad guys be Legos. She had us build our own little Lego characters, and that really brought the scene to life, because it gave us something to visualize. As a elementary school kid, we're comfortable with Legos. We know it. We've played with them before. We know what they are, and so that really gives us like a launching off point for our creativity, which I think is really cool.
And you can, if you take a hit and lose a shield, you can take the shield off the Lego. If armor gets damaged, you can pull off the armor. So it can become very, very tactile, a good way to keep kids involved. You can have them marching around on maps. Battle maps at this point are really more, again, for setting the stage. It's not about counting squares of movement. It's about saying, and my miniature comes running over and boom, attacks this guy. And that's what you want to do. And You can even let kids get up and move around and act it out, because that can be fun too. Kids this age are really not very inhibited when it comes to physical movement. They like getting up and moving around, and you can have them, as long as you're in a safe environment where they're not going to smack somebody or break something. You can have them get up and move around and act out what they want to do, and that can be a lot of fun as well.
And if your child is at the age where they can start doing some simple math and counting, polyhedral dice are a really great tool because they can roll them and then count them and do some simple math. If they aren't to the point of doing some more simple math and reading numbers, and they're only on like counting on their fingers, you can get dice with pips on them, and they can count the pips. And that could be really cool. And if you want to bring polyhedral dice, I suggest bulk dice. A lot of conventions have, in the dealer's hall, they have dice booths set up, and they'll have like a giant bucket of dice where you can just take scoops out of really cheaply. And that can be really nice. That way you don't have to worry about losing dice. And yeah.
I'll also mention polyhedral dice are a great teaching tool, just in general. They're fun to roll. A lot of kids haven't seen them unless, they're your kid and you have a whole bunch. But when my daughter was in elementary school, her math teacher would actually, I volunteered as a math games parent. And so every other week, we would have a half hour on Fridays where I would come in and we would play games with math. And some of the best ones were bringing in polyhedral dice and letting kids play math games with polyhedral dice. And if you ever want to do that with your kid, there are a ton of resources out there, just math games with dice for elementary school kids. And you can really cement some of the stuff that they're doing in school in a fun way. And then that carries over into role playing with your kids, because then they're kind of attuned to think, hey, this is fun. It's not something I have to do. It's not math. It's fun.
Some great game systems to use at this age are Mermaid Adventures was one that I really got into. It has a pip counting system, so you don't have to worry about multiples of 4. They just have to count pips on dice. They only have to count up to 6, and all you need are just a bunch of white dice and a bunch of black dice, and it's really easy to teach kids.
Third Eye Games has an entire line of settings based on the Pip system that are specifically designed for elementary school kids, where, again, all you need are handfuls of a light colored set of dice, a dark colored set of dice, and the ability to count up to 6. And so, lots of different setting there depending upon what is of interest to your kids. All right, do we have any questions, Desiree, on elementary school kids?
At this moment, we do not. I think everyone's just enjoying all the information.
Okay. So now let's talk about junior high school kids then. So junior high is an age where a lot of kids are starting to become more aware of role-playing games. It's a little bit more mainstream for junior high, certainly by high school. And kids at this age are really capable of being in a 2 to 3 hour game. 4 can still be stretching it, but 2 to 3 hours, piece of cake. And one of the nice things here is you start to see kids who have more life experience. And so they're starting to build on this idea of genres and tropes. They don't necessarily know what those words are, but they've watched movies, they've read books. They're starting to see common threads that they can pull together into a character. And so now the characters start to become people, if you will. When you're younger, a lot of times it's, my mermaid goes off and does this. Okay, cool. But every mermaid does everything. There's not as much of a sense of distinct characters. Once you get into junior high school, you're definitely at that stage where they are exploring the idea of a character. Now, they can be prone to stereotyping. And so this is also a great time where you can kind of help guide your children away from just leaning into stereotypes. Although some of them can be fun. You can have the stereotype of the the rogue character who stereotyping around class can be a lot of fun. Stereotyping around other characteristics. It's just something to think about when you're working with kids this age, because this can sort of cement it or help broaden their horizons. And also at this age, kids can start running for other kids. For example, like at a convention. Matter of fact, this is the age where I started pushing my daughter into actually running games at conventions, because having a kid run for younger kids is a huge experience for everybody involved.
You still want to have the adult there as kind of backup, because there's nothing worse than trying to run a game and all of a sudden forgetting a rule. So that can be kind of terrifying. But if you have an adult there, they can just kind of be backup to keep kids from being too rowdy and kind of corralling everyone, but while still letting you run the game. So it's really your game, and they're just there as backup. Again, this is a great time for you to use a GM screen, so that if you need to like vomit all of your thoughts out onto pieces of paper, you can have all of that behind the screen, so so there's a bit less stress behind it. But if you don't want to run something super complex, you can even just run a simple just fighting game. I was in a one game run by a kid that was around my age at the time, and he just gave us all superhero characters and then threw a bunch of bad guys at us, and it was a ton of fun. It was super simple, barely any story, and all of us had a blast. So you don't have to run anything super complex, but of course you can if that's of interest to you.
I did a one-shot one for kids, and let people know ahead of time this is going to do. But the first part of the game was taking, and we could have been building these. I chose not to because of the timing, but building up popsicle catapults. And so we did a game where it was a North Pole game, and you were the elves defending against the abominable snowman invasion, and we fired little marshmallow catapults at the figures and had kids running around and modifying the contraptions and setting traps and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And it was role-playing, because each little elf character had a different set of things they were really good at. But again, we got into a lot of fun here. It's like, okay, we're gonna fire the big mini marshmallow. Oh, that went way too far. Or, the really big puff marshmallow. Ooh, it fell right on top of you. That's bad. And so you can also engage in arts and crafts here. At this age, certainly kids are able to start making their own minis, painting their own minis. Some kids really like that. Picking out a mini. Wordlings is based around pre-painted minis with familiars of kids. And so going to a store and picking out a mini with your kids really cements for them, first off, the fact that they're making that choice and that you're supporting them. And, again, if they want to go buy one mini, throw a couple of colors on it. The paint job doesn't have to be great. It doesn't matter. They made the choices. They did the work. And that's what's really important there. And that's a great tactile way to get kids involved as well. We're going to be talking a bunch of times about, how do you address needs from various kids in terms of visual needs, movement needs, tactile needs, and so forth through all of this, because every kid is different, and you can't just take a crowd of kids and sit them at a table at any age necessarily and say, okay, we're all just going to sit here and we're going to play this game and there's not going to be any messing around. That doesn't work. Different kids are going to have different needs. Different adults have different needs. And so we're going to try and bring up some of these tips throughout. Again, if you're a kid GM, having a GM screen can help you. It can help, to have rules summaries, especially ones that you might be worried about getting wrong. If you're an adult, fudge your dice. No one will ever know unless they're listening to this particular talk. So other tools, again, Polyhedral Dice At this age, these make great stocking stuffers, by the way, parents. Kids, these are cheap enough that junior high school kids typically have enough allowance. They can go out and purchase their own bricks of polyhedral dice. It can make it a very personal choice, something they're excited to bring to the table. And again, battle mats, good for setting the stage. I don't tend to want to get too hung up on the rules around movement because that can be really frustrating. I charge into battle. Oh, you fell one square short. Bummer. Yeah. Oh, well, no, that's not fun unless they want to. And we are going to get into failure is fun for older kids. But for younger kids, again, still exploring, they want to be good at something. They want to move forward. And they love leveling up. They love like min-maxing. Oh, level up. I want the super sword. I want the magic cloaks. I want, the thing that'll take out everything. Again, that's kind of starting to fall into that concept of stereotyping, but also being powerful. And kids at that age really have a strong desire to be powerful in some part of their life. I think we all do, but I think this is an age where kids are starting to really explore, how do I make my own choices and succeed and be powerful with them. So this is a really fun age. This is a great age for kids to start being able to sit in with adults in games, as long as the game's going to be PG.
Yeah, and at this age, it's probably preferable to have an adult at the table as well, just to make sure that things are going well and the story isn't going anywhere you're not comfortable with your kid going, and just making sure they're staying still and participating and things like that.
And the good news is most conventions, when we're doing live conventions, will actually note, or actually even I guess online conventions, will note if their games are going to be mature audiences only, 18 or older, 16 or older, or PG. So I personally keep my games at PG. Sometimes we stray into PG-13 territory, mostly on maybe a setting might be a little bit more PG-13, but I try to keep my games PG because for me personally, I always want parents to know they have a place they can send their kids for a game that will be PG. Now, there are GMs, and I totally respect their right to do this, who don't want kids at their table. You do have to deal with more fidgeting, more distraction. And so there are people who don't want to deal with that. And so it behooves us all as players, parents, to make sure that we are matching up our kids with the right type of game for them. So in terms of game systems, Wordlings is Renegade's recent 5e compatible. We talked about this a minute ago in terms of miniatures. This is a really, really kid-friendly setting. It is all about kids being heroes with their familiars and helping other children, helping adults, even adults who may not believe in them, which can be a lot of fun too to explore. And it is just a fun, family-friendly setting. The good news here is this is 5e compatible, so it's based on a really well-known system. There are lots of different scenes within the one campaign that comes here. Other 5e compatible systems tend to have a lot of modules. It tends to be something people have heard of and are comfortable with. Cons here, medium rules weight. Okay, so if you have, so it can be intimidating in effect because there is a lot out there. Don't let that intimidate you too much. There is a lot online. There are a lot of actual plays out there for people to kind of see where adults have taken it. And it is a good launching pad into other 5e compatible systems.
With the opposite side of this is Savage Worlds. This is a less known system, but it's a lot more generic in terms of the rules and how to actually do something. And I think it really encourages a feeling of tell me what you want to do and I will tell you how to do it. And I think that's really important with some of these ages because they aren't necessarily going to be able to say, I want to jump across this chasm, so I'm going to roll my dexterity and I have this and yada yada. They're just going to know that they want to jump across the chasm. And sometimes as a GM, you got to be there and say, okay, tell me what you want to do, and then I'll explain what dice to roll, why you're doing that, what stat you want to use, etc., etc. So you can kind of take, as an adult GM, you can take those rules and onto yourself, and which can encourage kids to explore the more creative sides of role playing.
Their particular tagline is "Fast, Fun, Furious," and so in our experience, that works well with kids this age in particular. It really frees them up to just move. Sometimes, and it is very rules light. So that's a fun one. You know, both of these 5th edition, Savage Worlds, GURPS, these are all generic rule sets. And so you can also just take the core rule set and put it in any setting you want. So if you have a kid who is interested in one type of setting over another, this is a great way to just start exploring those. All right, I think that sums up what we wanted to say about junior high school. Any particular questions in that area?
So we did have a question right when we got into this section, just kind of backtracking a little bit about the dice or some place that you recommended, Third Eye or Three.
Oh, Third Eye. It's another generic role-playing system. It's called the Pip System, and it is aimed at much younger children. So it is the Third Eye games. And again, they just make a number of different settings that are really great for younger kids, because all you need are some light colored dice, some dark colored dice, 6-siders, and you're good to go. You know, Sigourney's first game that she ran of that, we had a 5-year-old at the table with their parent, granted, but they were perfectly capable of playing the game mechanically.
Awesome. And then we did have a question earlier. Elisa Teague is joining us in chat, so she kind of chimed in a little bit, but I wanted to see what you all had to say as well about about elementary age kids. Is Wordlings appropriate, or is it too complex? What are your thoughts?
So first things first, that's going to depend upon your kid. And as a parent, you know your kid. I think the setting is very appropriate. I think 5e for some kids will be too much. They're going to be staring at a character sheet that has a lot of numbers on it and trying to figure out where they're looking. Now, this isn't to say you shouldn't do it, because you absolutely can sit there with your kid and work through it together. But the burden is a little bit more on you as the parent to pull the game, I think, away from all of the numbers. And again, back into that, what do you want to do? Tell me what you want to do. We'll look at the sheet together and figure out how to do it. So, and that's kind of my general comment on 5e at that age. This is even in junior high school, late elementary, early junior high, the having too many numbers sitting in front of you can be daunting. And that was when I started playing. We were working with a rule set that was just a few numbers, and that made things a lot easier. We sort of abstracted it a little bit more. You want to do anything that requires any sort of strength. Well, that's just a strength check. And we're not going to worry about the finesse behind it. It's just a strength check. So you can abstract some of that stuff away and tell a fantastic story, which again, to me, is the key of this, is you are telling a story with your kid and hopefully having a blast, or they're telling a story with their friends. And you're all coming together for that narrative experience, which is kind of what role-playing is for me.
Awesome. I think, we do have one more question. So when running games for kids, what's the target number? 3 to 4?
Depends upon the age. The younger you go, the fewer. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I would say be careful with going over, because I don't have a good enough grasp of how many, because I haven't run enough games to be comfortable with numbers. But if you go over, then people are going to start getting distracted and wanting to do other things, and they're not going to be engaged. But if you go under, then people are going to lose that creativity, because a lot of kids like to bounce ideas off of each other. And so having I would say like 5 is probably a good group size, maybe a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit larger. That way they're constantly doing stuff, they're engaged, and they aren't at any point getting bored because everyone else is taking a really long time, but they also have those other kids there to kind of bounce ideas off of and improve your ideas that way.
Yeah, I think for elementary school, I'd actually go a little bit smaller group, maybe 2 or 3 kids. And then junior high, your GM and 4 kids is a really good size, I think. I think managing 5 junior high school kids, if you're an adult, is quite doable. If you're a kid who's managing 4 to 5 other kids, you're pushing the boundaries there. Mm-hmm. And that's just based on my personal experience being on both sides of the screen and working with boys, girls. Yeah. Now, once you start getting older, it becomes easier to run larger groups. You do always have to manage the spotlight and make sure that every kid is getting their time to shine. And they need to get their time to shine in pretty much every scene. Especially with kids, the patience level for today is, friend X's day. That doesn't go over terribly well. You want everybody to be able to shine in every adventure, every session.
And kind of a question, I think they're more just stating that they're new to RPGs and they're personally intimidated by 5e. Do you have any advice for someone trying to read that and learn it while they're trying to teach their 7-year-old?
Sure. So a 5e book can be fairly large because they're trying to convey an entire setting. The actual core rule set is fairly simple. And I think your best bet is to pick a setting that you like, but don't feel like you have to memorize everything in the setting. Pull it in as you want. As a GM, when I've got a new setting, I'll read some of the basic core stuff about how to just create a character and as a GM, make a few characters yourself. Mm-hmm. Get a feel for how that works. And then if you can, make characters with your players so that they can see. This is just like teaching a board game in that sense. Sit down, do it with them so that they can see the important steps. They can see the choices they're making. And then I'll be honest, I kind of skip to the first part of an adventure. So a lot of campaign guides will come with an adventure in them. Just skip ahead. And here's one part. They'll come with a lot of campaigns that I've run into will come with, even in Wordlings, it comes with a really rich adventure. And you don't have to consume all of it. If you have played in my Wordlings games at RenCons, one of the things that I tend to finish off my session saying is, okay, and we just did 3 scenes from, a sizable adventure. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So you can just sort of skip ahead and pick and choose what looks interesting. You can get the setup from the adventure, which is usually given in the first couple of pages, and then just make things up as you go along too. If you want to, there's nothing wrong with that. So read the rules about how to create a character, get an overarching kind of sense for the world, but you don't have to limit yourself to the specifics. If that is putting you off from doing it, don't. Just get an overall feel for the world. For example, in Wordlings, really key here, most adults don't believe in magic. Okay, that's a big one to know. Kids are running around with familiars, okay, that allow them to do these really, really cool things. That's a key piece to know. It's a fantasy style setting. Cool, sort of medieval age, sort of fantasy style setting. Okay, that's a key part to know. And how do you make a character? What's important there? So you can go do that, and you don't have to read the whole book.
Don't going back to what you said earlier, don't let the rules get in the way of a good story. So you don't have to know about like all the mechanics behind cover or dodging or whatever. If someone wants to do something, just make up a way for them to do it. It doesn't have to be accurate as long as it's fun.
All right, I think that's it for right now.
All right. I'll come back to that with high school, by the way, because I suffer from not always reading the details of a rule system. And so high school, this is where you will, creativity and theater of the mind is, like in my show notes, I wrote down, can be a boundless ocean at this age. Kids are super creative at this age, and they have enough personal experience, enough experience with books and movies and all different kinds of media and genre to really create a rich character. So my best tip, if you're going to GM for teenagers, is don't try to control the story. This is an exercise in improv for the GM. And that may sound intimidating, but really just go with it. Honestly, your characters are improving the whole way through. There's no reason why you as a GM can't do a little improv with it.
The players are going to give you a lot of information, and at this age, they're building the story in their head alongside you. So use that. So if they want to go off and do some some random thing that you weren't prepared for, if you're okay with improving that and going there, then go there, because it's going to be a ton of fun for both you and the players.
Mm-hmm. And again, don't let the rules get in the way. I have been called out on rules by teenagers a lot of times. And I just say, yep, okay, we'll play it that way then. I'm cool with that. You will run into teens who like reading the rule books in depth. Typically, you've gotten a little bit away from min-maxing at this age and a little bit richer characters. This is a great time to talk about failure is fun, and not getting too hung up on, oh, but I had cover, or that gave me a -1 to be hit, or something. Failure can be fun, and encourage that. You can have characters narrate their own failure. What happened?
One of my favorite things is taking those mediocre failures from just nothing really happens to you did it, but at some cost. That kind of yes, but can be really fun, because it takes something that just kind of fell flat and nothing really happened to an interesting story moment where you achieve your goal, but at some cost. So something that you weren't expecting, and that can also lead down some really interesting paths. One of the
that's one of the core conceits behind the Kids on Bikes system. Kids on Bikes, Teens in Space, is you're basically going to succeed at what you're doing. The question is, what complications are there? How did it not go quite the way you want? Did you succeed wildly, brilliantly? Or did you not you just barely did it? Maybe you wanted to get through a door without anybody hearing. Well, you got through the door. Okay, good. You also set off the alarm. It was a failure. It still falls under that definition, but you can fail forward.
One of our favorite tools is this yes/no die. It's pretty great. If a player asks you a question and it isn't like story breaking, and it isn't something that it just like immediately makes sense, you can just say, I don't know, does that happen? And then hand them the yes/no die. And that can be a really great tool, because it's like they're deciding their fate by rolling this die. But it isn't like a coin flip, which can kind of be awkward, and you have to determine is heads, yes and tails no. It just says yes or no, and that can also take a little bit of the blame away from you. So if it's something where you're like, maybe I'll allow that, you can hand the yes no die, and if it says no, that isn't you shutting the kid down, that is the die. And so the die might go into the timeout corner for a little while, but you walk away scot-free. But it's also really fun because it can allow for some crazy ideas to come through.
Yeah. So I tend to, with a yes, no die, if it's definitely not, if it's, if we've got a dinosaur world type of setting and somebody wants to have a spaceship crash land out of the middle of nowhere, no. The spaceship did not arrive and kill the dinosaur for you. That's not going to happen. Did the pack of velociraptors come charging through the woods suddenly? Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But, just because you have a yes doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with the consequences of the yes. And again, yeah, it allows for some creativity. Or maybe it's like, okay, we pre-prepared a tar pit and the Tyrannosaurus Rex is going to fall into it. Yeah, sure, why not? The area, that's your characters live here. You know where the nearest tar pit is. Sure, we can go with that. All right, danger avoided. Moving on. Yeah, that is a really powerful tool. I love that tool. You can start to use it with junior high school kids as well, because that encourages them to come up with some pretty off-the-wall solutions to problems without fear of consequences from the grown-up, not playing right or not. And I will actually use it even in my online games when I'm doing demos. I got a request one time. We had a mud-dwelling creature, and someone says, "Well, are these like crocodiles where you can flip them over, rub their belly, and send them to sleep?" And I went, "I don't know." So we rolled a yes/no die. It's like, apparently they are. So all of a sudden it went from a fight to kill the creature into we're all going to grapple the creature, flip it over, and rub its belly. And that's fun. That's not something that comes out of the rules. I'm pretty sure that creature doesn't work that way in the rules as written. But I don't care. It was a great story. It was a wonderful moment. I think they spent longer trying to subdue the creature by sending it to sleep than they did by actually if they attacked it. But a much better story. Much, much better story. And one that I will definitely treasure. So, okay. So now we're going to touch on a little bit about safety tools. So high schoolers, this is an appropriate time to start introducing safety tools. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because Victoria and Lauren covered it in a 90-minute workshop earlier this weekend. And you can go listen to a much more in-depth discussion. But I did want to touch on it because at this age, kids are starting to self-advocate, and they're also starting to explore themes that may be uncomfortable for one or more people at the table. So definitely introducing safety tools, whether it's an X card or lines and veils. There are lots of different tools out there, but letting them know that this is about respect. It's about respect for the GM, it's about respect for other players, and it's about self-advocacy. When a story starts going someplace that is making you uncomfortable, it's okay to say, hey, I don't want to go there. That's not of interest to me. And so, like I said, there's a great 90-minute workshop yesterday on this subject, so we're not going to touch on it too more than that, but definitely an appropriate age to introduce that and introduce it as a measure of respect to everybody around you, not a way to shut anything down, per se. All right. Our next topic is kind of about systems. 5e systems, definitely. They're very well known. They're readily available everywhere, and easy to find kids who've heard of it and are willing to jump in and try. You will still, like I said, you will get creative things. Let the kids or let the players drive the scenario too. One of your friends was a mute bard. I think, in a 5e game one time.
Yes, they refused to talk to anyone, so they decided they were mute.
Which made for some interesting choices for the GM, I'm sure. I wasn't the GM for that particular game, but you know, your characters will create hooks for you. That's not really an issue at this age. So 5e systems are going to be familiar, very easy to get people to sign up for 5e. Again, Savage Worlds is more of a cinematic type game, and kids have a lot of experience watching action movies by this age, so they know what that means. Kids on Bikes, Teens in Space, all great systems for, kind of. I think in some ways, though, these can be hard for kids to get their brains wrapped around, because Kids and Bikes fundamentally lives in a universe where there are no cell phones. There's no easy access to people in an emergency. And so getting kids to kind of think outside the box that way can be interesting. Teens in Space is space pulp science fiction. That can be a lot of fun. And also one-shots. So you can do a lot of one-shots with kids, encouraging kids to take turns being the GM.
This is really the age where you want to encourage your teenager to start running games. And that can be, if you have like a group of, if your teenager has a group of friends that they like playing games with, one thing that can be really great is having that people in that group switch off being DMs. So one week this person will be the GM, one week another person will be the GM, or even it could be longer stretches than that, basically however long that they are comfortable running their adventure for, maybe just however long the adventure lasts. But that allows kids to kind of explore both sides of the table and learn how to direct the story and also be a part of the story, which is really cool.
It also means that nobody is signing up to be the DM for all eternity. One of the big inhibitors that I think adults and kids both experience is, how do you get a GM? How do you find someone to go run the game for you? And a lot of people will, there are certainly people out there who totally love being your game master. This is what they enjoy about it. This is what they want to do. There are other people who would be willing to if they knew that they weren't going to become the GM for life. And so, especially with teens, because they've got a lot of things going on in their life, and you might have a couple of months where it's good for one teen to be able to prep, and some months where it's not, being able to switch off and give everybody a chance is a great idea. I think one of the other big learnings that we had a couple of years ago was, don't wait for everybody to come to an agreement on a date. Set a date.
People will make time if they're excited about it, and they're going to be a lot more likely to be able to show up if you say, okay, every week, Friday at this time. People will put that in their schedule, whereas if you just randomly say, okay, we're playing at this time, and just sporadically announce that, people aren't going to be able to come because they've already planned over top of it.
Mm-hmm. One of the greatest gifts I think my mom gave me in high school was she opened up her home to my gaming group every single Friday. And she was always nearby, providing snacks and there if there was a need. Otherwise, she left us alone. And so that was just really nice to have a regular place. And it can be in someone's home, it could be at a library, where you can go and just have a regular time and place to get together. Again, it sort of encourages, it goes from an ad hoc, I'll play if I feel like it at the time, to, no, we've got a group here that's doing stuff together and we all know when it's happening. So that's, especially with high school, as kids start to get to a point where they're driving, it can be really critical to make sure that everybody's on board with a very consistent time that they can build into their schedules, because they're going to start working jobs. They're going to start, being far more mobile, having other activities that demand a lot of their time. And so just having, an agreed upon time and place can be very helpful. But on the off chance that people can't show up, And this is also where we're going to talk about the social contract, because this is another great age to start to introduce the idea of a social contract. What do you do if not everybody can make it? My advice generally is still hold the time slot. People who show up, there are one-shots you can do. Fiasco is a fun one-shot around B movies. Icarus is one that has a dexterity element because you're building up a dice tower. Dread is a Jenga tower type game. Again, these are all good for one-shots. They can be, lots of different settings. You can play them over and over again and come up with different games every single time, even with the same setting and the same kind of rule set. But have a social contract if people aren't interested in that. If someone can't show up, are you allowed to run their character for them? Are you allowed to kill their character? That's a big one right there. Did your character suddenly stay up drinking too late the night before, or partying too late the night before, and you just can't wake them up that next morning, so they're just going to sleep in the tavern while you guys go off and do something that day?
Do they just kind of ghost character follow you around and not really participate in the story, but technically they're there? That can also be something you do.
Yeah. And that's the social contract. That's, again, gets back into how are we going to behave? We all have busy lives, and not everybody will make it there every time. When I first ran into this, when I started role-playing, and so this was back in 7th grade, and one rule we all sat down and agreed was other people could run our characters, but you couldn't kill our characters if we weren't there. So the first time I missed, they killed one of my characters. Well, my character, not one of. They killed my character. And they called and apologized, and they're like, sorry, but we got you a free resurrection. And I got resurrected as a different character, which led to some great storytelling there as well. But they did actually break the social contract with them. My resurrected character never let them forget that. And she had a huge chip on her shoulder over the fact that her party had let her die. So you can use these to kind of fail forward, if you will, but it is good to get some rules in place around that ahead of time. Okay, so I think that's what we wanted to cover. Are there any questions?
Nope, doesn't look like there is at this time.
Okay, so I'm going to have my daughter tell one story that is something that came out of her gaming group. This is a group of kids that had been playing at conventions together for quite some time. The conventions sort of shut down for a little while, so they went to an in-person separate group, and they were playing a science fiction game. And this is one of my all-time favorite examples of yes and.
Yeah, so this particular game is kind of sci-fi in space. So we were flying around in our spaceship when we noticed a distress signal beacon. So we go to the source of this distress beacon, and it's an asteroid with this crashed, abandoned ship on it. And we're all like, all right, this is going to be a trap. There is no way that there is actually someone in need here. Totally a trap. So we go up to the door, and somehow the idea of ding-dong ditching them gets brought up. And so we're like, is there a doorbell on this spaceship? Which is a weird thing to do, because spaceships aren't things you would normally expect to have doorbells on. But the GM decided to hand us the yes-no dice, and we rolled it, and there was, in fact, a doorbell. So we ding-dong ditched the space pirates that were hiding inside. So the GM just sits there for a minute going, what do I do? Then, in character, as these space pirates, he goes, did they just ding-dong ditch us? I think they did. What did we do? That wasn't something we were planning on. And then, of course, there was a battle, but that has been like an ongoing joke of ding-dong ditching space pirates, because it was so crazy and so fun, because no one expected there to be a doorbell there, and then it was, and it was really fun.
So that's the kind of creativity you can get with kids of all ages, but certainly as high school students. This is the sort of thing that they come up with. I had to keep one group from burning down an entire town in order to flush out folks from one particular house. They spent about a good hour trying to figure out how to get into a house to rescue someone. And someone finally came up with the idea that they would set the neighboring woods on fire. And they discussed this for a very long time and finally like, okay, that's what we're going to do. And I looked at them and I said, are you seriously discussing starting a forest fire to burn down the entire town in order to flush somebody out of one house? And they stopped and they thought about it. That you're trying to rescue. And they stopped and they thought about it for a second and said, I guess that is what we just said, isn't it? They ended up coming up with a different plan. But the thought processes that got us there were really funny. Really, really funny. And they ended up coming up with a totally different plan once I reminded them that they were actually trying to rescue some children in that house, and maybe burning down the house was not the way to do it. But it is fun. And you know, at the end of it, I'm looking at them going, okay, I have a yes/no die here. Is this really what you want to do? So go with it. It is fun. Kids, role-playing with kids is great. The story is the thing. Rules should always be subservient to the story. Encourage them to invest in their characters, but not limit themselves to the numbers on a sheet. And it's going to be fun. You're going to have a great time. So any other questions for us?
Nope, no questions.
Nope. No questions. Okay, well, clearly you guys are all very experienced or completely overwhelmed. I'm not really sure which. So, yeah, have fun with it, though. There's really just nothing like role-playing with kids. They will remind you why it is you love playing. And that's ultimately what a lot of this is about, too, is play. I don't expect, though, that most kids that you play with will end up doing a dark scenario. Most of them are going to be a little bit lighthearted. If you really want to do a horror theme, I would reserve that for older kids, for college students and later, because most kids in high school are going to want to have be more focused on the fun aspects of it and doing some crazy things and self-expression that way. It's a little bit less, even ones that really want a goth type character are still going to make that kind of fun and silly. All right, well, we do have some slides that just sort of sum this up for us, if you want to run those, Desiree. Mm-hmm. And I'll just comment to them really, really quickly. These are just reminders. So for pre-literate kids, and I'm going to be faking this one because I can't really actually see the slides at the moment. Short games, simple storylines, icon and picture-based tools. We talked about the Rory Story Cubes, or even just sitting down with picture books and having your kid narrate the story to you is a great tool. Please, please, please make time to read with your kids. Oh, that's right. I put stuffed animals on here. Stuffed animals and puppets are a great way to start role-playing with your kids because they can do fun voices and they're silly, and you can have your kid provide the voices, provide the conversation. Read every night if you can. Have them read to you. Even before they know how to read, they can tell you stories. It's great. And then the next slide. Elementary school kids, medium length games, 1 to 2 hours. Again, fairly simple storylines to keep them engaged. If you try throwing in too many complex things, they'll lose interest. Action-based, you can use numerical and word-based tools because they are starting to read, but keep it fairly simple. And again, tactile elements. Let kids get up, move around, run around. Let them move a miniature around going, and my miniature goes whack-a-da, whack-a-da, whack-a-da with the big axe. All of that is totally cool, totally okay. Helps them get into it. All right, and next, for junior high school kids, medium length games, 2 hours, piece of cake for them. Again, still we're sticking with action-based storylines. They can move from scene to scene more easily, and kids can start running games for other kids. And it's fun actually to watch kids run games for other kids. High school students running games for junior high or elementary school kids, junior high school kids running for elementary school kids. It's a great expression. I have yet to run into someone, I'm positive they're out there, but I have yet to run into a kid that like will jump into, yes, I want to go run a role-playing game for other small children. Encourage it anyway, because it's fun. And by virtue of taking the adults away from the table, you've taken up their stopgap and forced them to really step into the role of helping guide younger kids. And that can be very nerve-wracking, but if you've got an adult there to sort of back you up, it's quite doable and a lot of fun. All right, and last but not least, in high school, definitely 4-hour games, not an issue. Much more focus on cooperative storytelling. Have the players direct and provide ideas for where the story needs to go. This is going to stretch your improv skills, certainly as a GM, but you'll have a lot of fun with it. Kids this age have definite character concepts. They know what their character looks like, acts like. They're starting to write backstories for their characters, and they're very invested in that particular character, even if they later decide, yeah, I'm actually not having fun with this. I'm going to set this one aside and come up with a whole new one. There's a lot more thinking that goes into it. Failure can be fun. Yes, and to move a story forward, or yes, but. Both of those are great tools. And then I had something else I was just thinking of a second ago. Nope, don't remember it. As you get older kids, have them GM for you as parents. That's fun too. That's a lot of fun. And do you have any other takeaways?
No, that's pretty much it.
All right. You'll find systems that work for you. 5e is great. Any of the GURPS. I know that some people are real familiar with Pathfinder. I'm not personally terribly familiar with it. I get the impression it's pretty rules heavy for kids. That you have to be pretty invested in the rules system. That's just my impression of it. So I don't really know. I tend to move more towards the generic systems. And that also gives you the opportunity to customize your setting to wherever you want to go with it. So have fun. Tell great stories.
And we did have a question. So could you apply Kids on Bike system to a different story since the Kids on Bike system seems easier?
Absolutely. There's Kids on Bikes. The same system supports Teens in Space, Junior Braves. So there's a lot of places you can go with it. Kids on Bikes is, if you get the core book, one of the nice things about some of these more generic systems is they can be a little bit less expensive to buy a core book. And, it has the basic description of the rules in there. It happens to give examples with a specific setting or style of setting, but you can take that set of rules and put it anywhere.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions I see right now.
All right. Well, I encourage you to go have fun.
Yeah.
Enjoy playing.
Thanks for listening.
All right, everybody. Bye.